Team Riggs and I are getting ready to go work on a video reviewing the basics of area reconnaissance. But before we stepped out on that one, we needed to stop and talk about that first 24 hours of survival that was reviewed in the last week's video. In this one, we're going to break a few things down. We're going to use some footage from that video, as well as some footage from the grunt-proof survival games, and a little bit from today, to help go over some of the things that I think that we need to have in our kit bag when it comes to surviving and evading during those first 24 hours. Team and I am super stoked to tell you that this video is brought to you and sponsored by Winter Warfare. Winter Warfare is a veteran-owned company right here in the United States, and they have one goal in mind, and that's to be that resource for you for anything that you need to add into your kit to operate in winter and cold weather environments. So everything begins with that incident, right? It could be a natural or man-made disaster. It could be due to an enemy of the state. Regardless of the circumstance, there are a few key principles that we need to bear in mind and to operate with in our mindset as we're working through this contested environment. The first one, of course, is we need to get away from that X as fast as we can. Put time and space between you and anybody who might be tracking you. Team, and you need to operate with the understanding and the assumption that you're being tracked at all times right now. Somebody's looking for you. So this is going to help dictate our route. It's going to help dictate our speed and our movement. It's going to help guide us as we think about camouflage and concealment and the speed that we travel at. Because as we want to try to get away from that X as fast as we can, we need to understand that moving quickly degrades our ability to remain concealed and to make sure that nobody can follow us. Because the faster that we're moving, the more noise that we're making, the more light discipline that we're infracting, and the more sign that we're leaving on the ground, whether it's low sign or high sign. So we move away from the X, but we need to pick up a pace that we can sustain throughout the duration of the operation. We need to stop. We need to try to orient ourselves. Were we moving in the right direction from the beginning? Or do we need to change direction and create a route to get to an initial hide or hold-up site? As we do, hopefully you have a paper map on you as part of your packing list. You need to look for and think about terrain, vegetation, and even the weather considerations, because all of these things are going to directly relate to your ability to have freedom of movement. As soon as you're off the X and you start thinking about looking at yourself and what do I need to do now to camouflage, we need to think about shape, sheen, shadow, shine, all the S's that we have. But most importantly, team, we need to do what we can right now in this moment in order to help reduce and mitigate that risk of being seen. Maybe it is taking up some mud or some ash or some burnt coal and using it as a field expedient method of applying some camouflage. Taking our watches and anything that shines and turning it towards our body and our torso so that it doesn't reflect anything. Understanding the overall shape. Maybe it's changing some of our clothing that we had on initially that somebody could recognize. If we start taking and using vegetation, I want to try to avoid looking like I'm a walking dadgum bush. Do make some changes now in order to help your follow-on movement. So as you're thinking and considering terrain and elevation, you want to try to utilize a hide site that is up high as opposed to down low, especially if it happens to be off of a trail, which you don't want to do. But if that's what you're left with based off of your situation, it is much easier if somebody's walking down a trail to look down than it is to bend back and look up. And so use that to your advantage. But when it comes to routes and trails and open areas, these are all danger areas, whether they're open or whether they are linear. And they should be avoided at all costs. When approaching an open danger area, if you can, you want to swing around the outside of it. Move around the perimeter. For linear danger areas, try to find a space where there's an apex, because what that's going to do is it's going to limit the ability, should there be an observation post down the corridor, that's going to help mask your movement. But you also need to be aware of that the apex, that bend in the road, depending on how contested the environment is the spot to anticipate an L-shaped ambush. So we approach each danger area, and truth be told, every step, extremely intentional. Every step has to count. You have to look down where you're stepping and be aware of that, but you also have to be looking out through that wall of green. You have to think not just three-dimensionally, what's around to my left, to my right, to my forward, to my back, but also what is above me. Do I have a canopy overhead? Or am I walking out through an open area that, should an unmanned aerial system, or manned one for that matter, flies overhead, they're going to be able to identify my location and my direction. Course team, every time that you stop, you need to work through SLLS. That's stop, look, listen, and smell. These are the actions that we conduct at the halt. But they should be more than that. It should be part of our mindset that with every step that we're taking, we are actively looking, we are actively listening, and we are actively using our sense of smell in order to detect anything that's out of the ordinary. So in addition to looking for a space that's up high, but not so obvious that it's someplace that somebody could be using as an observation post, I want to think about least used routes and most used routes. A least used route is going to be bushwhacking through this nasty ass space that we have. It's going to be looking for places that are flooded, that are marshy, that are infested with chiggers and mosquitoes, places that nobody wants to be. We work through these areas because although it is going to slow us down and potentially leave more sign, depending on how soft and muddy the terrain is, I know that nobody wants to be in these areas. I want to look for areas that are thick in vegetation and low-lying brush and shrub, because the lower the profile that I have, the less of a probability of detection that somebody's going to have of my presence. I want to avoid the use of well-used routes. Again, we're thinking about trails and road systems. Could be game trails as well. I only want to use these to my advantage in order to increase speed, to separate myself from a tracking party in time and space. But as quickly as I can, I want to move off of them. When it comes to all of these linear terrain features, not only do we need to clear the near side and the far side, but if I have the awareness that I'm approaching one in the first place, I can use some basic evasion principles. The most common one is slipping the stream or cutting the corner. So you made it to a place where you can stop. Maybe it's that initial hide site. Maybe it's just a short security halt. You need to understand in these situations and scenarios, nothing is on your side. So you need to maintain a low profile, minimize all unnecessary movement. This is not the time or place to eat. This is not the time or place to talk. This is not the time or place to smoke or do anything else that is going to potentially give others a sign that you are present in that area. Again, you work through your SLLS and you determine your distance and direction to your next rally point. Once you get to a place where you can hold up, you can rest in place, whether it's overnight or during the day. And on that note, you want to use as much as you can the limited visibility to your advantage. But hopefully before you moved out, if you are operating or potentially operating in a contested environment, you've looked at your entire kit through every spectrum that you have available, whether we're talking about night vision devices or thermal, right? Know what the signature that you are giving off to others. Visibly, infrared, and thermal. Most common, most popular, most economical for adversarial forces. Be at your hold-up site where you can rest in place. You can stop during the day, cease all your movement, or maybe you're in a place and the night is falling and you need to find a place that you can hold up. You can rest, you can recuperate, you can determine how you're going to communicate with recovery forces. You can eat, you can drink, and you can just take care of yourself and try to calm down your mental state. When you do need to eat, you need to do so away from your holdup site. Again, all we're doing is leaving scent that could be tracked. And so maybe you can work off 100 or 200 meters away from your holdup site in order to go ahead and prepare your meal. When we have found that place that we can use as a holdup site and we want to start thinking about shelters, we need to use BLISS as our acronym, but I'm going to tell you and warn you that a shelter in an actual contested environment may not be an option that you have, other than finding some natural overhang or some brush that you can get under. But if we have the time and the opportunity to make a shelter, we need to blend in with our natural surroundings. It needs to be low in profile, of an irregular shape, secluded, and small in size. I want to try to avoid using all of the vegetation around me in my immediate area when it comes to breaking limbs or cutting down trees, which you want to try to avoid. I want to use and take it from around where I'm at and understand that vegetation over time is going to wilt. But you should also be aware of that vegetation locally is going to be better of masking your presence from multispectral sensors. And the most important thing in all of this, during those first 24 hours, actually happens before those 24 hours even ever began. And that was by working through rehearsals with your team in the event that somebody becomes isolated. What is your recovery plan to return people back to friendly lines? Again, those friendly lines just could be your house. Maybe it's an urban environment that we're talking about. Maybe it is out here in a wooded environment. But you have to have a plan. It has to be well thought out, working through all the contingencies, and it needs to be rehearsed. So how far can you travel in a day? If you're on flat ground on the road, man, you could put 20, 25 miles easy on a day. But when you're working through a contested environment and you're off in in a wilderness setting and you have a lot of brush and things that you have to work around, you're not going to be able to move that fast at all. You can still put a few miles on the road, but you need to understand the impact that wear and tear is going to have on your body. In the grunt-proof survival games, for example, from my insertion point, from that release point to the end, I was out 18 or so hours. And as the crow flies from point A to point B, not that I walked in a straight line, I only moved a few miles. So you can imagine how intentional each and every step is that you need to take. Team, I appreciate you guys. If you enjoyed the content of the video, of course, make sure you like it. Leave some comments down below. Maybe it's your own tips, your own techniques, and your own principles that we need to add in our kit bag as we're thinking about working through a non-permissive environment. And we'll keep this conversation rolling. As always, man, until then, you stay out there, you keep grinding, and you stay stoked. Who's training who? I will not use my rank, grade, or position to attain pleasure, profit, personal safety. Team, this is a short line from the creed of the non-commissioned officer. It's the yardstick that we use to measure ourselves by. And this is a particular phrase I think about quite a bit, especially over the course of my entire military career and and what I can do, what I have done, and what I'm currently doing that is either actual or perceived to be violating this principle. I think it's something that we should all be mindful of. That just because we are a manager, just because we're a supervisor, doesn't mean that we should be off cupcaking and lollipopping. Riggs agrees, but he does love to use his position as my best bud to get him what he wants, which is nothing but stick and ball time. But ultimately, I think there are those folks that use their position, whether it's in the workplace or in society, hell, even on YouTube, to project themselves as being better than in order to receive more. And then there are those who work selflessly to help bring others up. It's a choice that we have to make each and every single day.